Welcome to Women in Leadership Talk, where you'll hear from successful women who are empowering other women with their stories of adversity, resiliency, and success. And here is your host, Vicki Bradley, founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Thank you for joining us from 50 plus countries around the world. We are so grateful that you chime in and you listen to our show. And I know I ask this usually at the end of the show, but I am going to ask you, take a moment, make sure you review the show. Leave us a review if you want, but let us know how we're doing. That's how we grow the show. That's how we keep bringing these amazing guests on to talk to you and share their stories. So today I have a wonderful guest who's coming from Amherst. I'm saying it wrong already. And I'm excited to have her here with us. Her name is Teresa Amabile. And she says it way better than I do because she has that beautiful Italian accent. So Teresa, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be with you and your audience, Vicki. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I really don't have an Italian accent. All I do is say my last name in what I hope is close to the Italian way, Amabile.
Oh, I love it. I think you add that little oomph to it, which is fabulous. So. Yes, you do. I was sharing with Teresa audience before we went live here that that I feel like I should have been born and raised in Italy. It's like one of my favorite countries, and I've had I think now 8 or 9 visits, and every time I go, I just fall in love with it even more. So I'm very jealous that her roots come from such a beautiful, beautiful country. So let me give you a little bit of insight to Teresa and why I invited her to the show today. Teresa is a renowned speaker, number one, but she's also a co-author of a book called Redesigning, Creating a Life That Works for You. And this was really important for us to bring this conversation to you because so often retirement, we think, oh, that's so many years down the road, and it's here before we know it. And so I thought this would be a great conversation to have. She's also a researcher at the Harvard Business School. And without further ado, Teresa, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm excited to dive into this conversation about retirement and creating the life that works for you. So thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome. And let's go.
Okay, let's do this. So maybe tell us why you do what you do. So you're involved in research. It's important to you to create a life by design. But why are you doing what you're doing?
That is a big question, Vicki. And I don't think an interviewer has ever asked me that question before. I retired myself last summer, July of 2024, from a career of almost 50 years as a professor. I was at Brandeis University for 18 years, and then I was recruited by the Harvard Business School and spent 29 wonderful years there.
Amazing.
I think, and in both places, I did research. I published quite a bit of research, several books, over 100 scholarly articles. I taught classes in psychology, motivation, leadership, and creativity. And most recently, I've been teaching executive classes on the retirement transition and what it's like, how you can think about it most productively, and how you can prepare yourself to have a smooth transition into a satisfying retirement life. What drove me to do this all these years? I think it could be captured by 2 words: curiosity and caring. I became a researcher in psychology because I have always been deeply curious about people and what makes them tick and how they think, what motivates them to do what they do, what motivates the behaviors that they show, whether it's children doing a drawing, making a collage, or adults using their skills and their creative thinking abilities to come up with amazing new discoveries, start new businesses, invent new medicines, for example. I've always been fascinated with that. In my more recent years, I think because partly of my own life stage, I turned that curiosity toward the psychology of retirement. There was a lot of research on how important wealth and health are to the retirement decision and the retirement experience. But I wanted to look at the psychology of retirement. I wanted to understand what goes on for people. What are the psychological and relational and life restructuring challenges that people face as they're approaching that next phase of life? There was very little research on that. So I was consumed with intellectual curiosity about this stage of life, but also there was a personal curiosity. I wanted to get it figured out for myself, right? And the caring aspect, I think, has marked, I hope it marked all 50 years, almost 50 years of my career as a professor. I really cared about my students. I wanted to help the undergraduates I taught at Brandeis University develop as really productive and creative and caring young adults who would be a credit to society, who would contribute to their families and their communities and to the wider world. I cared about my doctoral students that I had at Brandeis and at Harvard Business School. I cared that they develop into people who would make amazing contributions to the world and who would be deeply good people while they were at it. And I cared about helping people in business, certainly the MBA students that I was privileged to teach at Harvard Business School. I was interested in helping them develop as leaders who would make a positive difference in the world. And the executives that I taught at HBS, same thing. I really cared that the people I touched have a positive impact on the world. And I cared about improving the lives of people around the world, primarily through the books that I've written. In 2011, I published a book called The Progress Principle with my co-author and husband, Stephen Kramer. And with that book, we were trying to tell managers and leaders of organizations what they needed to do to improve inner work life, to improve daily psychological experience for their workers, which, by the way, we discovered improves workers' performance.
Of course it does.
That was
Engagement, productivity.
Yes, and the subtitle of that book, The Progress Principle, the subtitle is Using Small Wins to Ignite Joy, Engagement, and Creativity at Work. And I do think that we had a positive impact on many organizations and on the lives of, I hope, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. And what I'm hoping my co-authors and I will do with this new retiring book, which is based on a decade of research that we did, what I'm hoping we'll do is help people at all stages of life to understand what the retirement transition is like, how you can begin preparing yourself for it psychologically, and in terms of the way you structure your relationships in your life, you can begin preparing for it when you're a young adult. We hope that it will also help young and middle-aged adults help their parents who are going through the retirement transition, which can be a very difficult transition for many people. And certainly we're hoping to especially help working people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are thinking about retirement, maybe unsure about it, maybe feeling reluctant to really take that plunge into retirement. I'm hoping that we can help them make this time of their lives deeply satisfying.
Wow, I love that. And that's partly why I wanted you to come on the show, was to open the dialogue up, right? To have some conversations around, I see so many people now at that age of retirement. And, just one example, I'll talk about my own mom, right? She just turned 82 in February, and
Wow.
she was a force to be reckoned with in the working world, and did not stop working until she was 78, and only because she started having health problems. And you see emotionally, psychologically, what happens when someone loses that choice. And so it is important, even if you're in your 20s, to start thinking about, what does that plan look like, right? And so I use my mom as an example, and I know you're going to have many that we can talk about. But I also think about one of my really close friends who is in her 70s and is working, has 5 different companies. And she says, and I'm curious how this plays into your research. She always says to me, I'll never retire because I'll die when I retire. And she goes, I love the learning. I love the purpose aspect of it. And she goes, and I don't have hobbies. Work is my hobby. And so I'm curious, how does that resonate even with some of the research that you ladies have done?
One of the biggest surprises to us, and I have to say that my colleagues were mostly ladies, my research team, but not all. Let me just
okay. Sorry about that. Thank you for correcting.
Do credit the amazing Lottie Balin, who was a retired professor from MIT. The wonderful Marcy Crary, who's a retired professor from Bentley University in the Boston area, and 2 colleagues who are retired professors from Boston University's Business School, Kathy Cram and Tim Hall, the lone man on our 5-person research and co-author team. We made a great
job, Tim.
team, I must say. We were all at various stages of going through the retirement transition ourselves during the 10 years that we were doing this research. So it was fascinating for us from both a professional and a personal standpoint. Getting back to your question, Vicki, one of the biggest surprises to us when and our research consisted of 215 interviews that we did over the course of many years with 120 people, most of whom we interviewed just once, but 14 of whom we call the stars in our book, 14 people allowed us to interview them repeatedly every few months as they went through the retirement transition, as they finished up their careers. So those final years or months, weeks of their career. And then as they went through the transition, and then following them for the first few years into retirement. That gives us a lot of rich depth in what retiring is really like, and the varieties of experiences people have, the different ways they approach it, and how it works out for them. But we also had this incredible breadth of interviewing these other people, these other 108 people, including some millennials who were in the early years of their career, and a large group of people who were in the last 5 to 10 years of their career, and then another group of people who had already retired. So depth and breadth in this research. And one of the most surprising discoveries to us was how much dread there is about retirement, even among people who are reasonably healthy and reasonably financially secure. And make that claim because we screened people and we only accepted people into our study if they rated themselves on our screening questionnaire as at least a 3 on a 5-point scale of financial security and on a different scale of physical health. So these were people who were okay. They were okay financially, not necessarily wealthy. We had some very high level people, some C-suite level people who were truly wealthy, but most of the people weren't, but they were financially secure. They didn't have to worry about money in their retirement, at least not any more than most of us do who feel like, okay, we're secure, but who knows what's going to be happening with the markets and how long we're going to live. But within that, they were okay financially. That wasn't a major concern for them, and neither was health. Right. And yet, as one person put it, facing retirement is like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a void. Mm. We had a word association game that we played with all of our interviewees. And one of the words we said, just say the first thing that pops into your head when you hear these words. And it was a number of words about work and career and employment and retirement. The word associations to the word retirement among the older adults who were still working full time, they hadn't yet made their decision about when they were going to retire. The single most prominent word in our word cloud that is the most frequent response was never. Never. And that's what you just described, right? About your
It is what I just said my friend said, yes.
Who owns these businesses. And we thought, what? There was never, there was far away, there was not me, there, and of course there were positive associations too. We heard things like freedom and relaxation, but those words were not as prominent among this group of older working adults, professionals, as words like never and scary. Scary was another big one. So we were really surprised about this, and we delved into our interviews to try to understand why. And we identified 3 prominent fears that people have. And, you know, I can tell you, I saw this in my own life. My dad, I kind of like your mom, my dad didn't retire until age 79. And it was really health problems, I think, that led him to finally give in to my mother's pleading that he please retire. He had started a small but successful business back in the 1940s. And it was the 1990s when he finally retired from that, from the company that he had started. I can tell you about those 3 fears if you think that would be of interest to your
I do think that's important. Yeah, Teresa, I do think that's important because, you know, as you and I talked about earlier, like there's definite themes that show up when you talk retirement. There's this, you know, the fear is one aspect. There's the excitement on the other side of that. And so then it's how do you navigate sort of the push-pull of fear and excitement, right? I've worked my whole life. I'm tired. I want time versus I don't ever want to retire, right? Because that I know that I need that stimulation, that learning. And sometimes we don't even know those are the associations we put with it. So what were the 3 main themes around fear that came up in your interviews?
First, there's a fear of losing your professional identity. For many of us, and I can say this is true for me, our identity, our personal identity is very closely overlapping with our work. One of the questions that we asked in the interview was, would you be more likely to say that your work is what you do or your work is who you are? And then after they answered that question, we asked them to explain it.
Love that question.
And there were so many people who said, it's who I am. And for at least much of my career, I would have said that, I think. I really would have. And we had another fascinating question. And we talk about all this in the book, and we even show pictures of it, where we gave people a piece of paper that had pairs of circles. And we said, this circle is you, your identity as you think of it, the most important core parts of who you are. And this is your work. And this one was labeled Y, and this was labeled W. And in the first pair of circles, they're very far apart. So for some people, this is pair A. Their work has no overlap at all with who they are in their own mind. And for other people, it's a little bit closer. That's B. For other people, it's closer. They're almost touching C. And then D, there's a little bit of overlap. E, there's a lot of overlap. And F, they're completely overlapping. They're one and the same thing. You and your work, same thing. And we had many, many people, especially in that older adult group, give us answers of D, E, or F. A lot of E's, a lot of F's.
Sure.
And if you
I can see. Yeah.
That is threatening. It's deeply threatening to think of letting go of that. And really, who am I once I'm no longer working?
Yeah.
So that's a big piece of it, that identity loss fear. There's also the fear of losing professional relationships, which can be very important to us. And it's kind of wonderful that many of us are privileged to develop deep relationships with people that we work with. I've got colleagues. There's a colleague that I began teaching with in 1977 when I first became a professor at Brandeis University. There are actually two people that I have in mind. One is a man and one is a woman, and they are both very dear friends, very dear friends. And fortunately, we've been able to maintain that friendship even after my move to Harvard, and even after I've retired and I'm now living in a different part of Massachusetts. But it's kind of rare to maintain a lot of colleague relationships after you retire. We found that many people in our study said, oh, I'm going to maintain the relationships I have, the friendships that I have at work. But then when we interviewed them later, it turned out that very often they found, those relationships have kind of fallen away. And they'll say things like, yeah, I guess we don't have that much in common anymore because we're not working in the same place. We used to talk a lot about what was going on at work, and also just that you don't see each other frequently anymore unless you really make an effort to see each other. That plays into it too. And people are worried about who will they connect with after they retire. So the relationship loss is something that people have to face and think about how they're going to deal with. And the third thing is the loss of life structure, the loss of that daily and weekly and annual rhythm and routine that our work lives give us, whether we love our jobs or hate our jobs. We pretty much know what we're going to be doing Monday through Friday, and sometimes on the weekend too. And think about it. When you're working full-time, even your non-working days, say Saturday and Sunday, are structured to a large extent by the fact that you're working, because those are the days you have to do all the other things that either need to be done or that you very much want to do in your life. Yeah. So those are the three: identity loss, relationship loss, and life structure loss.
Yeah, that so very profound. And when you were talking about the identity, this also happens when you face layoff or reorganization in a company, or illness. And that really resonated with me, Teresa, when you shared that, because back in the early 2000s, I had a pretty major health crisis, and I was in the peak of my career. And that was the hardest thing I struggled with, even more than the illness. The identity of who I was became a big question mark. And so, to your point, you're absolutely right. And those relationships, I remember he was a sort of a mentor to me. We sat on a board together, and he said to me, Vicki, if you're out of sight, you're out of mind. And I never forgot that. And so, to your point with the relationships, it is being very intentional with maintaining those relationships, because people get busy, people's lives change, all of the things that you were just talking about. And that becomes even more pronounced when you head into a major life change like retirement, because what do you talk about, right? Like, it does change significantly. So
Yes.
I love that you've been able to capture that. And so what, like, through what you've learned, your own personal experiences, what are things people can do to help them prepare for this journey, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, or whether you're in your 70s, 60s, whatever your ideal time of retirement looks like?
I have some very specific suggestions. I wonder, Vicki, if it would be good for me to tell the stories of a few people who had really nice, smooth retirement transitions, or relatively smooth, and contrast those with people for whom it was rougher, and then give the tips. Or if it would be helpful for me to give the tips first, which would you prefer?
I think let's share the tips, and only because I'm cognizant of our timing, but share the tips. And then, then, because I think stories are important and people relate well to the stories,
Yeah, and you
right?
know what? Then I can use the stories to illustrate the various tips.
Perfect.
Okay.
That would
So
be awesome.
one of the most important things you can do is to develop what we call the 4 A's in our book. And we just picked A words because they fit the findings, but also as an acronym to help people remember them. The first one is alignment. Alignment of
Mm.
yourself with your life structure. So I've mentioned both of those words already. Let me just say a little bit about what we mean by them in the specific context of our research. Yourself is everything important about you in your own view. So your most important identities, your most important values, needs,
Mm.
priorities, and so on. So, you know, my multiple identities include being a woman, an American, being a scholar, a researcher, writer, speaker,
Mm.
professor, being a mom, being a grandmother, being a wife, being a community member, a member of my church. My churches, I belong to 2 churches, but that's another story. And also my values. One value I have is to give to others. Another value
Mm.
I have
Nice.
is to stay connected to people who care about me and whom I care about. So that is the self, okay? And then there's
Mhm.
life structure, and that's everything in your life. Your relationships, your activities, how you spend your time, places where you spend your time, groups that you belong to, organizations you belong to, um, your closest affiliations, and so on. Alignment is good when your life structure has in it things that fit well with yourself, with who you
Mhm.
are now in your life, not who you were maybe 20 years ago, but who you are now. We found if people could look at their life structure clearly and look at their self, clearly and make changes in the life structure that were necessary to achieve a better fit, they tended to do better. They tended to have more satisfying lives. That's what we mean by alignment. The second A is awareness, because as I just implied, you cannot have good alignment of self and life structure unless you are well aware of yourself and your life structure. And you can get that awareness of self by, yes, introspection, but often by having deep conversations with people who know you well.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and asking them to reflect with you on, what your core self really is. Sometimes people can do this well with a psychotherapist if they have a good relationship with a therapist, but often a partner or spouse, a sibling, an adult child who knows you well, a good friend, a neighbor, a close colleague, people like that can help you reflect on who you really are, what's really important to you. And life structure, we have a wonderful exercise in the book, which is called Life Maps. And there's a way that you can literally make pictures of what your life structure is and take a clear-eyed look at how well it fits who you are now. The next A is agency, and that's proactively making change, where you perceive that there's less than good alignment. It can be anything from a minor tweak in one aspect of your life structure to a major overhaul of several aspects of your life structure. Obviously, a huge change is to change your life structure by eliminating career from it, right? That's a big life structure change.
It's
But there will
massive.
come a point, if you're doing this exercise well, if you're developing good awareness and looking at that alignment, there will come a time when you realize, okay, the alignment isn't so great anymore.
Yeah.
And I do need to make this change of ending my career. Doesn't mean I'm never going to do anything that I would call work again, but I'm going to leave my career job now. It's time. And the fourth A is adaptability. So as great as it is to have agency and to exercise agency in changing your life structure or even changing yourself, change in self can be necessary sometimes too. As great as it is to have that agency and exercise it, we cannot control everything in our lives. In fact, we can only control a little bit in our lives if we're really honest with ourselves. That's why we need the fourth A, which is adaptability. When something happens in our lives, could be a really positive thing, like a grandchild comes into your life, but you didn't control that. You didn't make that happen, but there it is. And you might feel that it's a very positive thing, but it's a big life change for many people. It's a change in your life structure. It is going to impact you. So what we found is that life structure impacts self just as much as self impacts life structure. So when something happens, positive, like I just gave the example of, or negative, your spouse develops a severe illness, for example. Maybe it's a terminal illness, death of spouse, a sickness in another close family member, or something that affects all of us, like, a global pandemic. Guess how much of our life structure was changed by that event, right? The external world. We have to adapt. We have to be able to roll with it. And we can develop those skills of adaptability as well. And in the book, we do give some suggestions on how people can develop all four of these A's. So that's the big tip. Develop those four A's. And I think if you do, you're likely to have a whole lot less fear and dread about retirement.
Well, I agree with you on that. I think that's a great point. Something you said, though, too, I think that's really important is the awareness and that agency piece, because sometimes psychologically, and I'm curious if this came up, people think, oh, if I retire, then I'm not useful anymore. And it's knowing like all the many things that you can do and how you can contribute that maybe you didn't get to do when you were working because you were too busy being tied to that particular role or job that you had. And so sometimes it's that mindset shift of what's possible versus what's not, right? So, an example I would use there is like when my mom, she developed a blood clot after she had the second vaccine. And that was devastating. And it totally paralyzed her emotionally, physically, mentally. And I kept saying to her, Mom, like there's so much life in you and so much knowledge in you. Go teach a course. Go get involved in the community. Like, no, you can't do the job you were doing any longer, but you have all of this amazing information that you can share with others now. And, she was like, well, that's true. I guess I could. But there was that hesitation and that fear would pop in, like who would want to hear what I have to say? And I think that's a very important aspect of agency as we start to, wind down that 25, 30 years, 50 years of doing something specifically. There's lots of other ways to contribute.
Absolutely. And part of the awareness, Vicki, is doing an inventory of the skills you've developed throughout your career. Most of us have developed skills that we may not even really think about that much, but they have so much to contribute to our communities or to the larger society. We interviewed one interviewee who had been an electrical engineer working at a pretty high level in his organization. And after he retired, he started volunteering in his community, which was building a new community center. He volunteered his time to help the group that was overseeing the electrical contracting.
Mm.
And for those first few months after he retired, he said he was working almost 40 hours a week doing this, but he loved it because, and this is key, if you can find an activity that you can use as what one person in our study called a landing spot, if you can find just one thing that you enjoy doing or one group that you're interested in, whether it's an art class or a way that you can volunteer your skills in your community, that can not only give you something really great and fulfilling to fill your time that used to be spent working, to fill at least some of that time, but it can also bring terrific new relationships into your life and give you a new identity. Yeah. So this guy, he ended up, I think, winning an award for community service that year, which gave him this wonderful new identity, right? But he said his wife was laughing at him because she said to me the other day, not much has changed. I used to hand you your lunch when you would go off to the office every day, and now I'm handing you your lunch to go down to the community center and hang out with the teams working there all day. And he really did develop some great friendships doing that. So absolutely, have one thing in mind, and you can start thinking about this when you're young. What things do I feel like I don't have enough time to do now, but I'd love to try? Or what skills am I developing that I could use in some interesting new deployment after I retire from my career? And certainly if you're in midlife and if older adulthood approaching retirement, think about that landing spot for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Love that. Such great insight and, research that you've done. So definitely common themes that have come out of this. And, audience, just from, just a quick recap, those 4 things that are so important is the alignment, awareness, agency, and adaptability. And starting to map that out, like how do you make those transitions in smaller steps, or even testing some of those things that you might be interested in participating in. I'm not retirement age, but I love to learn. So I went back to school, right? And people say to me, why'd you do that? And I'm like, some days I don't know. I hit myself in the head and go, why did I do that? but there was this push of learning and that curiosity of seeing a different perspective. And so there's no right or wrong. I mean, you shared the great example of this engineer who, helped in the community. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can engage in society and find that purpose, that what drives you to participate and connect in the world.
Absolutely. You mentioned experimentation, Vicki. We discovered 4 phases of retirement, 4 tasks that people really have to do. They can't avoid them if they want to have a satisfying retirement life. Of course, making the decision to retire is that first task that you have to do. And we had some people who struggled with that task for like 4 years before they finally did it.
Of course.
The second task is detaching from work psychologically. That can take some people a lot of time. Other people will say something like, I left my office on the last day and never looked back. The third task is experimenting and exploring to build a new provisional life structure for yourself, which can be incredibly exciting and fun. It can also be a little anxiety provoking. You can feel very liminal, like betwixt and between. You're not quite sure. But it's not like you have to continue pursuing something that you try out. That's why it's called experimentation, right? Just do some exploration, and you can start this before you retire. I think it could be ideal to start a little bit of it at least before you retire, so you have a landing spot in mind. And as you build that provisional retirement life and begin to live in it, you'll get a sense of what's working for you and what's not working for you. And you'll keep revisiting the self, who you are now. And you'll see that your life structure will change yourself. It will change you, bring you new identities and new things that you care about, new priorities for yourself. And that's pretty wonderful. And the fourth phase is consolidating a life structure for retirement that seems to be working well for you, a more settled rhythm and routine.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Oh my gosh, Teresa, thank you so, so much. This has been fabulous. And, as you were talking, I'm even thinking like what you just said about the recap there of how to prepare yourself. Like even with my son who's just graduated university, I've had that conversation with him about the experimenting, right? Like go try some things, see if you like it. You're young enough still that, if you don't like it, you can make a change. You're not locked in. It's not like a death sentence. Try some things, see what makes you feel good and what you get excited about. And I think that's true when you start to, I'm not even going to say wind down, because it's not about winding down. It's about what's that next chapter? How do you want to show up in that next chapter of life?
Absolutely.
Right?
A lot of people feel like they're winding up. Many people feel like they're kind of petering out the last few years of their career, that they're just plain tired of working, tired of the commute very often, and feeling a little stale maybe in what they've been doing for so long, and get really revved up and re-energized by the freedom and the flexibility and the new possibilities for having fun and deploying their life skills in new ways. Gosh, we had someone who became very active as a musician. He had dabbled in music most of his life, but he became very active playing in a band and joining 2 choral groups, one of them with his wife, and they ended up traveling the world with this choral group and just having a wonderful time and contributing. So very energized.
So find that purpose.
Very excited. Yeah, find that purpose. It can be purpose with a little p, that's, I'm going to have a wonderful lush vegetable garden out back, and I'm going to read all those books that I never had the chance to read before. It can be purpose with a big P, and starting a new company, which we had some of our retiring people do, and anything in between.
Lots of options. I love that. So Teresa, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. And just as a reminder to our audience, the name of her book that she co-authored is Retiring, Creating a Life That Works for You. So it's never too early or never too late to have a read. And, you're going to get tips from that. Teresa has been so generous sharing her tips with us here today, which I'm super grateful for. And Teresa, if they were trying to find you, if someone had questions, where would they be able to reach out to you at?
We have a website called retiringbook.com. So just go to retiringbook.com. You'll see a lot of information about me and my 4 co-authors. You'll see a lot of information about the book. We even have a little exercise you can do there to try out some of these ideas. And there is a contact form where you can get in touch with us. And of course, you can purchase the book through that website as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And audience, thank you for chiming in. We know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to. We're super grateful that you continue to join into the Women in Leadership Talk. Our goal is to bring you amazing guests where you take nuggets from these conversations, and hopefully that will impact you in a very positive way in your life. And as always, please visit the Women in Leadership Empowered website. We have our free leadership quiz that you can take. That'll give you a lot of insight as to how you're showing up as a leader in our world today. And that doesn't mean you have to be a corporate leader. That's how you show up. What vibration are you showing up with in this world? So thank you everyone for being here. We're super grateful, and we'll see you on the next Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Teresa, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Vicki. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for WIL Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.willempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.